Hi, I'm John Vorperian, and this is Beyond the Game. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on a NFL coach who had a real impact on the sport. He is none other than George Allen. And to do justice for Mr. Allen, we have, coming all the way from the Metro DC area, the author of George Allen, Mike Richman. Mike Richman knows the ins and outs of the Washington Football Club, not only as a fan, but as a journalist. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the show Mike Richman, the author of George Allen. Mike, how you doing?
Good, John. Doing very well, and thank you very much for having me on the show.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, and indeed, I love the look of that background. There's nothing better than maroon and gold. I remember the days when I went to college at American University, and the Washington team was known as the Deadskins. I didn't get to see what you got to see, but the glory years of Washington football under George Allen's tutelage. So tell me, what drew you to sit down and put together this comprehensive life story?
Sure. Well, first of all, George Allen was definitely worthy of a biography. He's one of the greatest coaches in NFL history. For regular season games, he's third all time for coaches with at least 100 regular season victories, third all time in winning percentage behind John Madden and Vince Lombardi. That's a phenomenal mark in itself. He went through all 12 of his NFL seasons without a losing season, and then you add in his two USFL years. He had winning campaigns in both of those years. And of course he's a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which is the ultimate distinction in his profession. So based on all of that, he's definitely worthy of a biography on it. But I thought I was definitely the person. I knew I was definitely the person to embark on this project because number one, I grew up with the George Allen coach Redskins when he arrived here in DC in 1971 to coach the Redskins. I was 10 years old and I became hooked on that team. I remember a few things here and there from the 60s, and my father took me to a few games, but it wasn't until Allen came here in 71 that I really gained a true love for the franchise. And at the same time, he created a winner here in the nation's capital. The Redskins went to their first playoff appearance in a quarter century, and then he took them to the Super Bowl the following year. And I also, in school, I acquired an interest and a talent for writing, and I ended up pursuing journalism. Wrote for my high school newspaper, my college newspaper, ended up pursuing journalism as a career. So you put all those pieces together, and also I gained a love for history too as a kid. My mother took me to almost every museum in the DC area, and we know there's a lot of them. So just put all those pieces together, and that's where the interest and the desire to pursue this book on George Allen came from.
Well, Mike, as a journalist, and I think we do have proof of what you're saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. There we have you in striped pants and a wonderful shirt there in front of your dad's store, Pantstown. Can you tell us a little bit about this image that we are seeing right now?
Sure, I would love to talk about that. So that was after the 1971 season, after Allen's first season coaching the Redskins. And Brig Owens, who was a Redskins safety, was a customer of my father at his men's clothing store. So the two were in discussion at some point about getting a Redskin to come for a promotional appearance to sign autographs. I guess Owens couldn't do it or didn't want to do it or whatever, but he found another Redskin to actually do that, and that was running back Charlie Haraway, who had a great 71 season and was a very good blocking back for Larry Brown. So sure enough, Charlie Haraway showed up at my father's men's clothing store, signed autographs, took pictures, and that picture was taken out in the front of the store. And I was just like I was a kid in a candy store that day, just chatting with him, and he was a very nice guy. I remember him. I had friends who were over there. I invited them to come. So that was definitely a memorable day in my childhood. And and also, not many people my age are really, have that such a love for football, a love for sports for that matter. But I knew at that time that football was my game, and it's something I wanted to pursue, not necessarily as an athlete, but in some capacity.
You know what surprised me in reading George Allen? It was clear that from the get go, he was on a path to get to the NFL, and he's one of the few people that I was surprised to learn he was the head coach for football at Whittier College, the school in which Richard Nixon played on the line. But Allen coached there. They had a winning season, and he jumps into the pro ranks. I'm curious. He does get to a championship team, and I want to talk a little bit about the Monsters of the Midway, George Halas, and his relationship with George Allen. The 1963 championship Bears, it surprised me to think that here it is, George Allen writes a thesis as a student, and Halas grades it in a way, and yet when it comes time for possibly putting him on the coaching staff, Halas resists. Can you elaborate as to why, in a way, Halas gives a blessing, and then later on, really has to be sold on the idea of bringing George Allen on board to his staff?
Sure. Well, in terms of the master's thesis on the importance of scouting, which was a very daring thing, I would say, to write a thesis on, or much different than what someone would ordinarily write about. Halas was one of three NFL coaches that Allen contacted for his opinion on the importance of scouting. And just reading his comments in the book, I'm sure you recall him. It was like Allen caught him at the wrong time because Halas said, I'm very busy right now. But he did answer Allen's question about the importance of scouting. Later, when Allen was trying to get into the NFL, he was actually out of coaching for a while. He got fired by the LA Rams after the 1957 season. So then he was selling weighted footballs, and he was going into NFL training camps. He made his way into the Chicago Bears training site, and Halas would not bring him on immediately as an assistant. One of Allen's other assistants was trying to get Halas to hire Allen on the staff. Halas didn't hire him immediately, but he did bring him on as a spy because Allen had been in the system of the LA Rams, and the Bears had two late season games in 1958 against the Rams. So Halas brought him on as a spy for those two late season games, and then he hired him as the head talent scout in January of 1959. So yes, Halas was a little reluctant at first, but then he saw more in Allen. He brought him in as a spy, and there was also a death on the Bears staff that opened that spot as the head talent scout. So that's when Halas hired him for that permanent role.
Well, clearly Allen had a knack for spotting talent. I mean, for the Bears, he secured Mike Ditka, the Hall of Fame tight end.
Right. It wasn't only Ditka. I mean, he found Gale Sayers and Dick Butkus in the 1965 draft. I mean, those were, you could argue that 65 draft is one of the greatest in NFL history. Not only did Halas was he instrumental in finding those two players, but he also drafted an offensive lineman named Steve DeLong in the first round as well. DeLong opted to play in the AFL for the San Diego Chargers. He was a one-time Pro Bowler in his career. And then in the fourth round, the Bears drafted a running back named Jim Nance, who was a two-time Pro Bowler, two-time first-team All-Pro in the AFL. That was another find in that draft. So in addition to those four guys, and you also mentioned Ditka, Ronnie Bull was a Bears draft pick in 1962, NFL Rookie of the Year. Allen was the head talent scout at the time. So, which actually, that whole sequence of having such a keen eye for young talent, that it led me to ask the question to myself and also to Bruce Allen, George Allen's son, who was on the front lines of his coaching career. Why he had such a sharp eye for young talent, and then when he got to be a head coach, he focused so much on veteran players. And as the way Bruce Allen described it, his father felt that immediacy to win as a head coach, that urgency, and he thought that veterans would be the way to do it as the head coach. Because when he was hired as the Los Angeles Rams coach in 1966, the pressure was starting to build on the head coaches at that time to win, not necessarily in their first season, but to gain that, put them on that winning track early
Yeah.
on in their coaching stint with the respective team.
So I'm a little. Can we sort of focus on what would you say is George Allen's legacy? Is it the defense-oriented play of let's get 3 yards in a cloud of dust, or is it the talent spotting, or is it the future is now, veterans only? How do you assess it, Mike?
Sure. Well, number one, you have to take into consideration all of the accomplishments he had statistically. Like I've mentioned, third all time in winning percentage for regular season victories, and then the undefeated seasons. You have to account for all of that. Being in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, major part of his legacy. But he was an innovator on defense and special teams. That is something else that got him into the Hall of Fame. On defense, he introduced schemes that are part of the game today, the 5 and 6 man defensive backs, uh, the nickel and dime defenses, respectively. On special teams, he hired one of the first true special teams coaches in the league, in Dick Vermeil in 1969. The Eagles hired Marv Levy that same year as their special teams coach. So Vermeil with the Rams and Levy with the Eagles were the first two special teams coaches in the league. But Allen also, he depended on special teams for at least 2 victories per season, and he put so much emphasis on practice with special teams in preparation for games, and it showed, making big play after big play in the games. His special teams did that so many times. I'll give you one example of that. In a 1967 game, a Rams player named Tony Guillory blocked a punt late in the game against the Green Bay Packers, next to last game that season. The Rams were trailing at the time. They ended up winning that game 27-24. That block punt put them in position to score the winning touchdown. That win, plus the season-ending win over the Colts that year, a great Colts team that finished 11-1-2, like that Rams team did in 67. And the Colts didn't go to the playoffs. Beating the Colts in that season-ending game put the Rams in the playoffs in 67. So that's one example of a great special teams play. Defense and special teams, and also that 63 championship win over the Giants, that Bears 14-10 win over the Giants. Allen, you could say, was the architect of that championship win. I mean, having that ferocious Bears defense, he was the head defensive coach at the time. Hallis elevated him to that position in the 63 offseason, and then he coached that amazing Bears defense in 63. That the offense was it was just a mediocre offense. It didn't produce much. That team was so dependent on the defense, and so Allen was the key to that championship victory. So that's another part of his legacy, having a ring from that team.
Okay, so Mike, let's play a little bit of the Beyond the Game fantasy football championship round. Of all the pro teams that George Allen coached, whether it be the Bears, Rams, Redskins, who are you going to slot and play the game to win it all? What team would you say from George Allen's career would do the job?
I think the 67 Rams team was the best team that he coached. That 11-1-2 team that I described earlier. That team, unfortunately, well, they lost in the first round of the playoffs to the Packers. Back in those days, that Packers team, by the way, finished 9-4-1. Back in those days, the home team alternated every year between divisions. So the Packers ended up hosting that playoff game and won. I'm not saying the Rams definitely would have won if they had hosted that game in the LA Coliseum, and it was also tough playing after those 2 emotional late season victories in 67. But I would pick that 67 Rams team as the best overall team that he coached. I mean, you can't dismiss the 72 Redskins team as well. I mean, they finished 11-3, advanced to Super Bowl 7, and had a very good shot at actually winning that Super Bowl that year. So that team would be right behind the 67 Rams team. That would be the answer to your question.
Yeah. With regards to if you have 2 quarterbacks and then you have no quarterback. I recall the Dallas Cowboys, whether it was going to be Staubach or Craig Morton, but I guess there was a similar situation there in our nation's capital with regards to Sonny Jurgensen or Billy Kilmer. How did the decision was made to go with which signal caller?
Sure. Well, when Allen became the Redskins coach in 1971, he knew right off the bat that Jurgensen was going to be a starting quarterback. However, he traded for a backup to Jurgensen in case something would happen to Sonny. So Kilmer was with the Saints at the time, and the Saints were about to draft Archie Manning. Kilmer knew that. He wanted out, and so Allen traded for him. Allen had seen him when the Rams played the Saints in the 60s. So Allen traded for him. So Jurgensen, sure enough, he got injured in the 71 preseason. Kilmer came in, started most of the 71 season, ended up starting most of the games through Allen's first 4 years in DC while Jurgensen was with the team. So and Allen really gained an affinity for Kilmer. Kilmer was more like he was an extension of Allen on the field. Conservative play calling. He listened to instructions. Back then, the quarterbacks called their own plays, but still, there had been, team meetings beforehand, and Allen liked the fact that he was a, conservative play caller. Jurgensen, on the other hand, would freelance. I mean, he would not necessarily listen to the coach's instructions, and he would air it out when the coaches didn't necessarily want him to. So yeah, that was that whole situation between Kilmer and Jurgensen. Then after the 74 season, Edward Bennett Williams wrote a memo to George Allen saying that, listen, George, you can't keep both Kilmer and Jurgensen on the team at the same time. They're making too much money. Kilmer made $125,000 in 1974, and Jurgensen made $180,000, which at the time was a lot of money for an individual player. So it was then that Allen decided that Jurgensen was the quarterback who he was going to say, listen, Sonny, we're not going to renew your contract. And sure enough, Jurgensen's contract expired on May 1st, 1975. There's a story that is often told among Redskins fans that Allen single-handedly forced Jurgensen into retirement. It's not necessarily, entirely true when you look at all the pieces of the story that Williams initially influenced him to pick between Kilmer and Jurgensen.
Yep. I was always fascinated with the fact that George Allen, 24/7, 365, football, just focusing on the sport, thinking up ways. I know that you must have had a few conversations with family of George Allen. Can you share what surprised you the most from any family member about learning about Coach George Allen?
I have to say that I knew about Allen's vanilla personality up front. I mean, I had done research beforehand through my other books. I knew about that. I knew about his workaholic nature, that, like you said, 24/7, 365 days a year. I guess it's that if there's anything, it's that the boys in the family, the three boys, they were able to gravitate toward that. They were able to become acclimated to it more and gain an appreciation for it more. Being boys, they were able to hang around and, they were in the locker room. Bruce Allen was a ball boy for the team. So I learned a lot more about that. And the other sons, George, Felix Allen, and Greg, they knew about that as well. They were able to spend time at the practices too. And Jennifer, on the other hand, was not able to take part in that too much for obvious reasons, being a girl. And so if there's anything surprising is that, how much the boys were able to share in that more, and that they didn't feel alienated, if anything, because of that. Whereas Jennifer, she had a much tougher time with that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Bruce Allen goes on to be an NFL executive. George Felix Allen is a quarterback at the University of Virginia, and I was kind of surprised that George Allen's son played an offense position. Why not, safety or DB? Did he get any tips from his dad with regards to being a quarterback at the
Um,
University of Virginia? I should know less. I should be pointing out. Yeah.
that I don't know in terms of any of his aspirations for playing on the defensive side of the ball. I actually, in all honesty, I didn't explore that part of their relationship. But it is interesting though that George Felix Allen, he was actually a star quarterback in high school, and then he played his freshman year. He played at UCLA.
Oh.
He played at UCLA for a coach named Tommy Prothro, who was later Allen's replacement with the Rams. Uh, but then when the Allens moved east, George Felix Allen, the son, he transferred to Virginia. He went to school in Virginia. That's when he became a quarterback there.
And of course, let's bring up the one game I actually physically was in the stadium to watch. It was here in the Metro New York area. The New Jersey Generals going up against the Chicago Blitz. Can you tell me what research did you do focusing on the USFL and George Allen's experiences in that renegade league?
There is a full chapter in the book on his experiences in the USFL, which was a very, very interesting part in his life. He had two winning seasons with the Blitz in 1983, going to the playoffs that year. And then the Blitz and the Arizona Wranglers swapped franchises. And Allen and the rest of his staff ended up going to Arizona, and he coached the Arizona Wranglers his second year. And actually, that was a more fulfilling season. Finished 10-8 in the regular season, but then he won his first two playoff games. He beat the Jim Kelly quarterback Houston Gamblers in the first round, and then he beat the Los Angeles Express in the second round. And then they lost to the Philadelphia Stars in the championship game that year. But no, he basically the same. He had the same philosophy, the same approach in the USFL. He wanted those veteran players in there, and he recruited several of them from the NFL. One of whom was Stan White, the great linebacker for the Baltimore Colts. He recruited several of his Redskin players. Eddie Brown, defensive back, he came in and played for both the Blitz and the Wranglers. But he wanted that veteran presence in there because he wanted that, again, less less possibility for mental mistakes on the field. So any leadership in the locker room and during practice. So that part of his game, the long practices, that was all the same. The discipline in the practices, no frills, focus, that was all the same. So yeah, it was very interesting. One interesting anecdote that Roman Gabriel shared with me, who was an assistant with Allen with the Wranglers, told me is that because it was so hot in the Phoenix area, they started practices really late, starting like 10 o'clock in the evening. And one time they ran out of the lights shut down at the high school where they practiced, and so they Allen told everybody position your cars around the practice field. So everybody turned their cars on, and their front lights on the cars ended up being the lights for the practice. But yeah, that was a very, very interesting period in Allen's life. And then he went into that job gung ho. I mean, he was really intent on succeeding, of course. And his first season in Chicago, I asked one question of one of my sources. Did Allen want to show Hallis up at all? Because Hallis and Allen had a strained relationship from the end of their period with Allen's period with the Bears. So, and interestingly, no, I was told no. Allen didn't really want to show Hallis up, who was still the owner of the Chicago Bears, but he was intent on beating up everybody else in the USFL. So, but yeah, that was a really good time, really good coaching period in Allen's life, and going undefeated in both seasons added to his streak of undefeated pro seasons.
In fact, I recall when the USFL started up, it seemed that it really showcased Coach George Allen. With regards to, we mentioned...
Oh, they absolutely did. They loved his big name in the USFL. He was actually the biggest name among coaches in the USFL.
Yeah. And he did bring on somebody on board, I believe. I guess Marv Levy was there, with Washington, and I believe he was there with the Chicago Blitz with Allen. And the coaching tree, I guess if we have a minute, I just was curious as to the coaching tree of George Allen. Can you recite it?
Well, Levy is one of them. Levy was George Allen's special teams coach in 1971 and 72 in Washington. Dick Vermeil is another one. Uh, Schnellenberger, that's a very interesting name. He was an assistant under Allen with the Los Angeles Rams. Later went on and won a national championship at Miami. Um, there were others that went on to become head coaches in the NFL. Mike McCormick was an assistant under Allen in DC, I think through the 72 season. Then he became the Eagles head coach in 73. So Ted Marchibroda, he was part of Allen's coaching tree. And actually, Marchibroda was with Allen throughout his entire stint with the Los Angeles Rams, 5 seasons with the Rams. Then he coached under Allen for 4 seasons in DC, and then he became the head coach of the Baltimore Colts. Mm-hmm. So those are just a few of them. Bill Belichick was not part of Allen's coaching tree, but he's quoted in the book because he has one of Allen's books, George Allen's Guide to Special Teams. In fact, it's in his office, and I wrote away to the Patriots media people. I asked, hey, can I send you a few questions that Bill Belichick can answer about George Allen and special teams? And sure enough, in the back of the book, you'll see that there's a part where Belichick is quoted. It's describing, the importance of George Allen's Guide to Special Teams and how he's taken some of what he learned from that book and implemented it as part of his special teams, the way he coaches special teams in the NFL.
Yeah. Well, Mike Richman, I want to thank you for taking us beyond the game tonight with George Allen, and do wish you all the best, and just hope that things are a little more smoother in Washington for the gridiron game. Thanks, and hope you come on back soon with another one of your fine titles.
Thank you very much, John. It's always great to be on with a fellow PFRA member, and I know we've spoken at several of the conferences already, but thank you very much for having me on your show.
Yeah. And this is John Vorperian for Beyond the Game. Thanks ever so much, and see you soon. Bye-bye for now.